My name is Darius. I was born in Tehran, Iran, in 1980, the same year the Islamic Revolution was still reshaping everything around us. And I want to say that first sentence again, because it matters more than you might realize at first. 1980. 1 year after the revolution that fundamentally changed the face of Iran and the lives of every single person inside its borders. I was born into a country that was reinventing itself around a single, all-consuming idea. The idea that God, specifically the God of Islam, the God of the Quran, the God of the Ayatollahs, was in charge, not just spiritually, not just in the mosque or in the heart, but politically, legally, socially, and in every corner of every life. God was in charge. The Islamic Republic of Iran was his government, and everyone inside those borders was expected to participate, fully, completely, without question. I grew up with the smell of revolution in the air, with the Quran on our bookshelf and the Ayatollah's image on every wall. In our home, Islam was not a private thing, a personal preference, a spiritual practice you kept to yourself. It was the oxygen in the room. You breathed it. You lived it. There was no separation between religion and identity, between faith and citizenship, between what you believed and who you were allowed to be. My father was a low-ranking officer in the Revolutionary Guard, the Sepa, as we called it, and my grandfather had participated in the early days of the revolution, had marched and prayed and believed that they were building something sacred on earth. To be Muslim, to be devout, to be loyal to the Islamic Republic, was not just religion in our house. It was identity. It was survival. It was everything. I want to tell you my story today not because I enjoy remembering pain, and believe me, there is a great deal of pain in what I'm about to share with you, but because I believe someone watching this right now needs to hear it. Maybe you are questioning things you were told never to question. Maybe you are in a situation similar to mine, and you feel completely alone and completely terrified. Maybe you have a hunger inside you that you cannot name, something that reaches for something more real than what you've been handed, and you are afraid of what following that hunger might cost you. I was there. I know every corner of that feeling, and I want you to know, there is a way through. It is not easy. I will not lie to you and tell you it is easy, but it is real, and it is worth it. Now let me start from the beginning. I grew up as a faithful Muslim boy. This is not a small thing to say. I was not a superficial Muslim, not someone who performed the rituals without believing them, not a person who went to the mosque because his parents made him and counted the minutes until it was over. I was the real thing. I prayed 5 times a day from the age of 7, genuinely, not just going through the motions, but believing that God was listening, that the postures of prayer meant something, that the Arabic words I recited connected me to something holy. I fasted during Ramadan with sincerity and pride. When I was hungry, genuinely hungry, the way a growing boy gets hungry, I told myself that the hunger was a gift, that it was supposed to remind me of the poor, that it was supposed to purify me. And I believed that. I memorized long passages of the Quran. My mother would sit with me in the evenings and listen while I recited, and her face would glow with something that I can only describe as joy. My teachers at the mosque praised me. The imam who led Friday prayers at our neighborhood mosque told my father that I was one of the most promising young students he had seen in years. When I was 12, a cleric told my father that I had the heart of a soldier for Allah. My father wept with joy when he heard that. He hugged me so hard that night. My father, who was not a man who showed emotion easily, who had been shaped by the culture of the Revolutionary Guard to be disciplined and hard and restrained, he held me and his shoulders shook. And I felt, in that moment, held by my father in our small kitchen in Tehran, that I had found my purpose. I was going to serve God. I was going to serve Islam. I was going to be the man my father and my grandfather and my country needed me to be. School was also saturated with religion. In Iran after the revolution, the education system was completely reorganized around Islamic principles. Our textbooks were different from textbooks in other countries. Our teachers were vetted for religious correctness. We learned history through the lens of Islam, the great Muslim empires, the early caliphs, the martyrs of the faith. We learned that the West was decadent and corrupt and hostile to God. We learned that America was the great Satan, not just an enemy in political terms, but a spiritual enemy, an enemy of everything holy. We learned that our revolution was unique in history, that what we were building in Iran was something sacred, that we were a people chosen by God for a special purpose. And because I was a boy who wanted to believe, who wanted to be good, who wanted to make his father proud, I believed all of it, completely. I had no framework to question it. The questions that might have challenged it were not permitted inside the world I inhabited. The books that might have offered different perspectives were either not available to us or were presented as dangerous and corrupt. I was a fish who had never been outside the water, and I did not know that fish could live anywhere else. I joined the Basij, the paramilitary volunteer force connected to the Revolutionary Guard, when I was 15. This was not unusual for boys my age from families like mine. The Basij was presented to us as an honor, as an opportunity to serve God and country in a direct and tangible way. We were told that the Basij were the defenders of the revolution, the protectors of the faith, the young men who would ensure that what our fathers and grandfathers had built would not be dismantled by enemies foreign and domestic. We trained, we drilled, we studied Islamic doctrine. We were told that to die in service of this cause was the highest honor a man could receive, that the gates of paradise opened wide for the martyr, that God's approval was the only approval that mattered, and that the Basij was one of the clearest paths to earning it. We believed it completely. I believed it completely. I was 15 years old and I believed I was on the right side of God. By the time I was 22, I had been recruited into the Revolutionary Guard itself, the Sepah-e-Pasdaran. This was considered a significant step up, a mark of distinction, a recognition that I had the qualities they were looking for. I was disciplined. I was ideologically reliable. I was smart enough to be trusted with more sensitive work. I won't tell you details of what I did in those years, because some of those memories are still deeply painful to carry, and because I am not here to incriminate anyone or invite danger to myself or to others. What I will tell you is this: I was a loyal soldier. I followed orders without significant hesitation. I believed, genuinely believed, that what I was doing was righteous. I believed I was on the right side of God. I believed that the people I was trained to see as enemies, dissidents, journalists, intellectuals who criticized the government, minorities who practiced outside the approved forms of Islam, and yes, Christians, I believed that these people were at best misguided and at worst genuinely dangerous. I believed that protecting the Islamic Republic from them was a holy act, but something was always there, in the back of my mind, a small voice, a quiet question that refused to go away no matter how many prayers I said, no matter how many Quranic verses I recited, no matter how deep I pushed it down, no matter how much training I did, or how many times I told myself that doubt was weakness, and weakness was sin. The question was simple, and it was not a theological question. It wasn't about the nature of God, or the authenticity of the Quran, or any of the intellectual objections that religious debates usually focus on. It was a human question, a question that came from somewhere below argument, somewhere in the body, somewhere in the chest. And the question was simply this: is this really what love looks like? Because I had been taught, and I truly believed this, that God was great, Allahu Akbar, God is great, that God was all-powerful, that God was just, that God demanded obedience and punished disobedience with perfect and absolute fairness. And I believed those things. But somewhere inside me, underneath all the training and the doctrine and the years of religious education and the uniform and the prayers in Arabic that I recited in forms I had memorized but whose deepest meaning sometimes felt just out of reach, underneath all of that, there was a boy who wondered, does God love me? Not just require things from me, not just judge me, not just watch to see if I perform correctly, but actually love me? Like a father? Like someone who knows my name and cares whether I am sad? Someone who is glad I exist not because of what I do but because of who I am? I never spoke this question out loud, not once in all those years, because to question was dangerous. To doubt was weakness. To whisper anything that sounded like uncertainty about the faith was to invite suspicion. And in the Revolutionary Guard, suspicion could destroy your life. So I kept the question buried, and I kept serving, and I kept praying, and I kept telling myself that this hollow feeling in my chest was just weakness that I needed to overcome, and that a true soldier for God did not indulge in weakness. The moment that changed everything happened when I was 31 years old. It was 2011. The Arab Spring was spreading across the region. Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria, and inside Iran, there were whispers of protests, of people who were growing restless, of voices that wanted to be heard, of memories of the Green Movement that had risen and been crushed 2 years earlier in 2009. The government was on edge. My unit was involved in monitoring and suppressing certain activities within Tehran that were deemed threatening to the security and stability of the Islamic Republic. I will not give you specifics, but one night, a night in early spring, I remember there was still a chill in the air, the kind of cold that gets into your bones. We were sent to a location in a residential neighborhood of Tehran, where a group of people had been reported as gathering illegally for purposes deemed dangerous to the state. When we arrived, it was a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an ordinary building. The door looked like every other door on that landing. You would never have known. We had intelligence, or what we were told was intelligence, that indicated there was something there worth investigating. My unit stacked up in the stairwell. I was first in the door. That was often my role. I went in first. When we entered that room, I saw something I was not prepared for. Not logistically. I was always operationally prepared, that was never the issue. But something I was not prepared for emotionally, spiritually, in whatever part of a person experiences things at the level below words and training. These people were not dangerous. They were not armed. They were not plotting anything against anyone. They were sitting in a circle, some on chairs, some on the floor, and some had their eyes closed and some had tears running quietly down their faces, and they were praying. There was a man, maybe 60 years old, perhaps older, with white hair and large, gentle hands and a face that looked like it had spent a great deal of its life in a state of quiet peace, who was reading aloud from a small book with a worn cover, a Bible, and the words he was reading, I can still hear them. Even now, even after everything, the words were unlike any religious language I had ever been given. He was reading about love. He was reading about a God who came down, who became a person, who touched the untouchable and ate with the excluded, and said to the woman caught in shame, "Neither do I condemn you." He was reading about forgiveness that was not earned through correct performance of rituals. He was reading about grace, a word I knew intellectually, but had never experienced as a living thing. Grace that was freely given, not because the receiver deserved it, but because the giver was full of it. His voice was completely calm. Even when we burst through the door with weapons drawn and shouted commands, even when everyone else in that room gasped, some of them screamed, some threw their hands up, some of the women gripped each other, one young man knocked over his chair scrambling backward. Even when the room erupted in fear, this old man with white hair just slowly, very slowly, closed his small, worn Bible. He placed both hands on top of it in his lap. He looked up, and he looked directly at me, not at my uniform or my weapon or the authority I represented. He looked at me, at Darius, the person inside the uniform, and he said quietly, in Persian, with no trembling in his voice at all, "God bless you, my friend. I had a weapon. He had a Bible, and he blessed me. I cannot fully explain to you what happened inside me in that moment. I have tried to explain it many times to many people, and I always come up short, because language is not quite adequate for the kind of thing I am trying to describe. Something broke, or maybe something opened. The way a door that has been sealed for a very long time opens, not explosively, not shattering, but with this feeling of, oh, this is what was behind there. I felt it physically, this sensation in my chest, behind my sternum, like something that had been locked for 31 years, suddenly cracked along a seam. And all I could think, standing there in full uniform in that room full of terrified people, was, I have never felt what this man feels. I have prayed thousands of prayers. I have recited thousands of verses. I have fasted and submitted and performed and served, and I have never, not once in my life, felt what is on this man's face right now. What is in his voice? What is in the way he is looking at me like I am someone worth blessing rather than someone to be afraid of? We did what we came to do. I stayed in the background during the processing. I could not look anyone in the eye. Later that night, when the work was done and I was alone, I sat in my car in a parking lot for 3 hours. The engine was off. I did not move. I did not pray. I just sat there with my hands in my lap in the dark, with the old man's face in front of me and his words moving through me like something I couldn't stop. God bless you, my friend. God bless you, my friend. God bless you, my friend. I want to stop here for just a moment, because I know that, right now, wherever you are watching this, whatever country, whatever language you're thinking in, whatever your background is, I know that if you are watching this video, there is something in you that resonates with what I'm describing. That hollow feeling, that question underneath the question, that sense that all the religious performance in the world isn't filling the thing that's empty. If that's you, I see you. I really do. And I want to ask you something. Drop a comment below this video and just tell me where you're watching from. Just your country or your city. That's all. Because one of the things that helped me survive those years was discovering that I was not as alone as I thought I was. And maybe your comment today will help someone else watching this feel less alone too. I'm going to keep going now. We are just getting started. For the next several weeks after that night, I was not the same person. Not dramatically, not visibly. I was still showing up, still performing my duties, still saying the right things and wearing the right face. But inside, something had fundamentally shifted. My colleague who worked closest with me asked twice if I was sleeping poorly. My superior officer remarked that I seemed elsewhere. I told them I was fine. I'd been trained to maintain a controlled exterior regardless of what was happening internally. But internally, I was burning. I had begun to think about that old man constantly, about his face, about his voice, about the quality of peace he had, not the peace of someone who doesn't know what fear is, because he clearly knew exactly what was happening when we came through that door. He was not naive or oblivious, but the peace of someone who knows what fear is and has found something larger than fear to hold on to. I wanted to know what that was, not intellectually. I wanted to know with my whole self. I wanted to feel what he felt. I began to search, carefully, because I knew better than almost anyone, the risks involved in searching for what I was searching for. The internet in Iran is heavily filtered and monitored, and I was not just any person. I was a person who understood surveillance systems from the inside, who had been trained in how they worked, who knew the tools that people used to bypass them. So I used those tools, carefully. In late night hours when my apartment building was quiet and the chances of anyone watching my specific connection at that specific moment were lowest, and I searched. The first thing I searched for was, who is Jesus? I phrased it exactly that way. Not Jesus in Islam. I knew what Islam said about Jesus already, that he was Isa, a revered prophet, a figure of great importance, born of a virgin, a worker of miracles, but not divine, not the Son of God, not the one who died for the sins of humanity. I knew that framework. I had been given it since childhood. What I searched for was who Jesus was outside of that framework, what the people who actually followed him believed about him, what they had written, what he himself had said. And I found the Gospels. I want to try to tell you what that was like, reading the Gospels for the first time as an adult, without the Islamic interpretive lens, without a teacher telling me what I was allowed to think about what I was reading. It was like, I keep reaching for comparisons and none of them are quite right, but let me try. It was like being a person who has eaten only one kind of food your entire life, and suddenly encountering something entirely different. Not necessarily better food, your brain doesn't even have that category yet. Just different. Different in a way that makes you realize there were dimensions of nourishment you didn't know existed. I read the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. In my world, in the world of the Revolutionary Guard, in the culture of the revolution, meekness was not a virtue. Strength was a virtue. Dominance was a virtue. The ability to project authority and control and power was a virtue. Meekness was weakness. But here was this man saying that the meek were blessed, that the merciful would receive mercy, that the pure in heart would see God, that the peacemakers, were the children of God, not the warriors, not the soldiers, the peacemakers. I read the story of the woman caught in adultery. The religious authorities drag her before Jesus. They are testing him, trying to trap him between the law of Moses and Roman law, and Jesus doesn't answer immediately. He bends down and writes in the dirt, and then he stands up and says, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And one by one they leave. The oldest first, the text says, which is beautiful, because perhaps the oldest had the most history to weigh. And then it's just Jesus and the woman. And he says, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" And she says, "No one, Lord." And he says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more." I read that story on a Tuesday night in my apartment. I read it 3 times, and then I just sat with it. Because in the tradition I came from, the story would have ended differently. She deserved punishment. The law demanded punishment. To let her go was to be soft, to be complicit, to fail in the duty of upholding righteousness. But Jesus, this Jesus who I was reading about for the first time with real attention, Jesus looked at the woman that the law condemned and said, "I don't condemn you. Now go and live differently." He offered her both mercy and a direction. He didn't demand she prove her repentance before he extended grace. He extended grace first and trusted that it would change her. I read about Jesus touching lepers. In first-century Jewish culture, lepers were untouchable, ritually, socially, completely. You didn't go near them. You certainly didn't touch them. But Jesus touched them, deliberately, personally. This gesture of reaching out with his hand and making physical contact with the people that his society had labeled as untouchable, as other, as less than, this was not incidental. It was the whole point. And then I found the parable of the prodigal son. I read it at 2 a.m, alone in my apartment, and I had to put down my phone and stare at the ceiling afterward, because I had never in my life, not in all my years of religious education, not in all my prayers, not in anything I had been taught, encountered this image of God, a father who has 2 sons. The younger one demands his inheritance, essentially wishing his father dead, the most shameful thing imaginable, and the father gives it to him. The son goes away and wastes everything. He ends up feeding pigs, the most unclean animal in Jewish and Islamic tradition, and wishing he could eat what the pigs were eating. He hits absolute bottom, and he decides to go home and beg to be made a servant, because even his father's servants have more than he has now. But here is the part that stopped me. Here is the part that broke something open. The text says, "But while he was still a great way off, his father saw him," which means the father was watching, which means the father was looking down that road every day, hoping, waiting, watching. And when he sees the son in the distance, the father doesn't wait for the son to come all the way. He doesn't compose himself and stand in the doorway and let the son approach and deliver his prepared speech of repentance. No, the father runs. He ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. This dignified man, a wealthy landowner, a figure of community standing, he runs down the road, in public, to embrace a son who shamed him. And before the son can even finish his prepared speech, the father is calling for a robe and a ring and a feast. The son did not earn his way back. The father ran toward him. I lay on my bed at 2:30 a.m. in Tehran, Iran, with tears running silently down into my pillow, and I thought, in all my years of religious life, no one ever told me God was like this. No one ever gave me this image. I had been given a God who judged, who required, who punished, who was perfectly just in ways that were sometimes terrifying and never particularly warm. But here was a God who ran, a God who had been waiting and watching, and who ran. Over the following months, I read everything I could find, all 4 Gospels, the letters of Paul, especially Romans, where Paul writes about grace and faith in ways that felt like oxygen to someone who has been trying to breathe in thin air. The Psalms, which are full of the most honest human emotion I had ever encountered in a religious text, grief and anger and doubt and longing all laid out before God without apology. I found online recordings of pastors, many of them Iranian Christians who had fled the country and were broadcasting in Persian from outside Iran, from England and Germany and Canada and America. I listened on headphones, volume low, late at night. I heard testimonies of people like me, Iranians, Muslims, who had come to faith in Christ, people who understood exactly what it cost, people who had lost families and homes and careers and safety, and who still said, with tears in their eyes, that they would not trade what they found for anything in the world. And slowly, not in one dramatic flash, but slowly, over months of reading and listening and lying awake at night in conversation with someone I wasn't even sure yet was real, Slowly, I crossed a line. I don't know exactly when it happened. There was no single moment I can point to and say, there, that's when. It was more like the way dawn comes, gradually, imperceptibly, and then suddenly the world is lit, and you can't remember it being dark. One night I prayed a prayer that was different from every prayer I had ever prayed in my life. I didn't use the formal Arabic phrases. I didn't follow the prescribed positions. I just lay on my back in my apartment and spoke, in Persian, out loud in the dark, to someone I couldn't see. And I said, if you are real, if what I have been reading about you is true, then I want to know you. I want what that old man in the apartment had. I want to be known the way that father knew his son. I want someone to run toward me. If you are there, please show me. It was the most terrifying prayer I had ever prayed, and it was the most honest thing I had said in years. What followed was not a magical transformation. Let me be absolutely clear about that, because I know that testimonies sometimes get edited in the telling, the fear and the difficulty smoothed out, the journey made to sound more triumphant than it actually was in the living of it. I did not wake up the next morning with peace. What I woke up with was the same dangerous life, the same dangerous job, the same world in which what was happening in my heart was a secret that could get me imprisoned or killed. And now a growing conviction that I could not unhave. In Iran, apostasy, leaving Islam, is not merely socially unacceptable. It carries severe legal consequences, especially for a man. And I was not just any Muslim. I was a member of the Revolutionary Guard. If anyone discovered what was happening inside me, the response would not be gentle. There would be no conversation about my spiritual journey, no encouragement to think it through, no family members sitting down with me to understand. There would be an interrogation, there would be consequences. And for someone with my knowledge and my former position, consequences was a word with a very wide and very dark range of meanings. So I lived a double life. By day, and sometimes by night, I continued doing my job. I continued attending Friday prayers. I said the right things at the right times. I performed the ablutions before prayer. I observed the forms. I gave nothing away that I could help giving away. And in private, in stolen moments before anyone else was awake, in the silent hours after midnight, in the short gaps of solitude that my life occasionally offered, I read the Bible and prayed to Jesus, and slowly, carefully, tried to understand what was happening to me and what I was going to do about it. I want to be honest with you about what that period felt like. It was the loneliest time of my life. I know that might sound strange. I was surrounded by colleagues every day. I was embedded in an organization with thousands of members. I had family in the city. I had people around me constantly. But I was completely and utterly alone with this secret that was simultaneously the most wonderful and most terrifying thing I had ever carried. I could not tell anyone, not a single person, not my brother, who I was close to, not my childhood friend who I had known since we were 7 years old, not my mother, who would have been devastated, not anyone, because to tell someone was to put them in a position of knowing something dangerous, and I could not do that to the people I loved. There were days when the loneliness was so dense that it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I would be in a meeting, surrounded by colleagues, going through the motions of my job, and I would think, none of these people know who I am right now. The person sitting in this chair with this face and this uniform is not the person I am becoming, and I am becoming him alone, in the dark, without anyone to witness it or confirm it or walk alongside me. That is a particular kind of solitude that I do not wish on anyone. I began to understand, in a very personal way, why those people in that apartment had gathered in secret at such great personal risk. Because the need to share this, the need to worship together, to pray in community, to not be utterly alone with a faith that is alive and growing, that need is so profound, so human, so deep in the nature of what we are, that people will risk their lives for it. They were not gathering because they were reckless. They were gathering because the alternative, isolation, was unbearable. I understood that now from the inside. For almost 2 years I lived this way, reading in secret, praying in secret, growing in something I had no name for, no community to give it language, no teacher to explain it, no fellow traveler to confirm that what I was experiencing was real and not a breakdown or a fantasy. Just me and a Bible and a God I was beginning, slowly and with great trembling, to trust. And then I made contact. There was a network. I will describe it only in the vaguest possible terms, for the safety of people who may still be active within it. But there existed, inside Iran and connected to Iran from outside its borders, people who quietly, carefully, at great personal risk, helped Christians in situations like mine. Underground church networks, people with resources and connections and a willingness to take risks on behalf of strangers, because they believed that every person who was searching deserved the chance to find. I found a way to reach one of these contacts through a chain of communication that required patience and care and several weeks of coded and indirect exchanges. Making that first contact was one of the most frightening things I had ever done, because I could not be certain, could not be entirely certain, whether I was reaching a genuine believer or an intelligence trap. Entrapment operations existed. I knew this. I had been on the other side of them. The thought that this entire thing might be an elaborate setup to catch someone exactly like me, a guard member with doubts, a potential defector, a security risk, was never entirely absent from my mind during those weeks of careful communication. But I continued, because the alternative was continuing alone, and I had been alone for 2 years, and I was running out of the capacity to sustain it. We communicated carefully for several weeks before we agreed to meet in person. The meeting was in a public park in Tehran, the kind of place where 2 people sitting on a bench looked like nothing at all. I wore civilian clothes. I arrived early and sat for a while, watching for anything that seemed wrong. The person who eventually sat down next to me was a woman in her late 50s. I will call her Maryam. She was wearing a dark hijab, and she carried a cloth bag with vegetables in it. She looked, to any observer, like a woman who had stopped to rest on the way home from the market. She did not look at me immediately when she sat down. She straightened her bag. She breathed calmly. And then she turned to me, and she had the same quality about her that the old man in the apartment had. That absolute, inexplicable calm. That warmth that does not compute given the circumstances. She looked at me for a moment with eyes that seemed to see considerably more of me than I was used to being seen, and she said very quietly, in Persian, "Darius, God has been pursuing you for a very long time." I could not speak. For a moment I could not speak at all, because that was exactly how it felt. Not like I had found God, like God had found me, like the father in the story, watching down the road, running. Maryam connected me to a house church. It was small, never more than 8 or 9 people at any one gathering. We met irregularly, rotating locations, never in the same place, twice in the same season. Every person in that group had given the matter serious thought before joining. Every person understood that discovery meant arrest, interrogation, almost certainly prison, and the possibility of far worse. There were people in that group who had already been through interrogation before, and who had somehow survived it and come back. There were people who had family members in prison. There were people who had lost jobs and had been evicted from housing because their faith was known. And yet they came, and yet they gathered, and yet they sang, quietly, with closed doors and low voices, and their hearts completely open. The first time I took communion with that group, I wept silently through the entire thing. I am not someone who cries easily, or I wasn't before all of this, but something about the act, the bread broken, the cup shared, the words repeated that Christians have been repeating for 2,000 years. This is my body, broken for you. This is my blood, poured out for you. Something about participating in that ancient act for the first time, in a hidden apartment in Tehran, surrounded by people who had paid real prices for the right to be in that room. It was more than I could hold without weeping. I need to tell you about the night everything collapsed. It was a Thursday evening. The month was February. I remember the cold with particular clarity. One of those Tehran winters where the cold seems to have weight to it, where you feel it in your chest when you breathe. I had been part of the house church for about 8 months by this point. I was not happy exactly, because my circumstances were not circumstances in which happiness was the primary feeling available. But I was something better than I had been before. I was alive in a way I hadn't been. I was connected. I was known, at least by these 8 or 9 people, in a way that mattered. That afternoon I received a message from Maryam. It was terse. It said, "Do not come tonight. Something doesn't feel right. Stay home." I stayed home. I sat in my apartment with my Bible, and I prayed, and I tried not to think about what "something doesn't feel right" might mean. The next morning, I learned through my work channels that the house church I had been attending had been raided the previous night. Several people had been arrested. I sat at my desk reading the report, and I felt the blood leave my face. I have been in enough dangerous situations to know what physical fear feels like. The body knows before the mind catches up. My hands were cold. My vision narrowed slightly. I kept my face absolutely controlled, the way I had been trained to keep it, while everything inside me was falling. Mariam had not been there that night. She had known, or sensed, or received some warning I never fully understood, and she had been safe, but others had not been. I don't know what happened to all of them. I know that some of them were detained for months. I know that at least one person from that group, someone I had prayed with, someone who had held my hand during the Lord's Supper, spent years in Evan prison. I know that others faced interrogations that left marks that will not heal in this lifetime. I spent the next 3 days in a state I can only describe as a controlled collapse. I continued showing up for work because not showing up would have been conspicuous. But I was operating on something like autopilot while my mind ran scenarios in continuous loops. Had my name come up? Had someone talked? Had my connection to that group, my history, my position, my face showing up in whatever records existed, had any of it been identified? Every face I passed at work looked for a moment like someone who knew. Every unusual glance felt like the beginning of something. Every silence felt like it was about me. No knock came. Not that week, not that month. And I will never know exactly why, whether I was simply fortunate, or whether my former position provided some degree of protection, or whether the raid had been about something other than the complete list of attendees, and I had simply fallen outside its specific scope. I don't know. What I know is that I was alive and free and standing in my apartment in Tehran, and the people I had prayed with were not. The guilt of that was enormous, is still enormous. I carry it. There is no clean resolution to it, no theological formula that makes it go away completely. What I have found is a way to carry it without being destroyed by it. But I carry it, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not stay. Whatever protection my former life had afforded me, it was running out. The situation had changed. I could feel it the way you feel a storm coming, not in any single definable thing, but in everything simultaneously. In the quality of the air, in the way small things were slightly off in ways that individually meant nothing but collectively meant leave. Now, while you still can. I made the decision to leave Iran. I want to try to help you understand what that decision actually means, because I think sometimes when people hear, "he left the country," they picture something like getting on a plane with your bags and going somewhere new. It is not that. Leaving Iran, the way I had to leave Iran, was dismantling your entire life. It was accepting that every person who loved you, every street you knew, every memory that was attached to a specific physical place, all of it was going to be gone. You were going to become a person with no country, a person who could not call their mother freely, a person who might never again sit across a table from their father, a person whose history was not portable, whose language was not universal, whose home was no longer a place that existed for them. I said goodbye to Tehran without saying goodbye, because to say goodbye would have required explaining. I drove past my parents' house the night I left. I slowed down, and I looked at the kitchen window. The light was on, yellow, warm light, the same kitchen where my mother had listened to me recite the Quran, where my father had held me and wept with pride. I sat in the car for a few minutes, looking at that light. I thought about going to the door, about knocking, about sitting with them one more time, about trying to find some way to make them understand without endangering them. I didn't go to the door. I couldn't. The safest thing I could do for them was disappear without involving them. So I looked at the light in the kitchen window for a few minutes, and then I drove on. The journey out of Iran was not something I can describe in operational detail, and I won't, not because I am trying to be mysterious or dramatic, but because the people who helped me are still alive in this world, and some of them may still be doing what they were doing when they helped me, and their safety is worth more than any detail in my story. What I will tell you is that it was not a clean or simple or safe journey. It was not a matter of days. It required crossing through regions where being identified as what I was, a former Revolutionary Guard member who had converted to Christianity and was attempting to flee, would have resulted in outcomes I don't want to describe. There were nights when I slept on floors of buildings that were barely standing. There were hours in the backs of vehicles, pressed against strangers, in complete silence because sound traveled in the wrong direction. There were moments, more than one, when everything stopped, and there were voices and lights, and the kind of silence that is not peaceful, but is the kind of silence where everyone in the vehicle is trying not to exist. In those moments, I prayed, not in the way I had prayed for the first 30 years of my life, in the way I had prayed since discovering who Jesus was, simply, directly. Jesus, I am here. Please. I arrived in Turkey with almost nothing. From Turkey, through a process that I will summarize only as long and difficult and bureaucratic and humiliating in the way that all processes are humiliating when you are a person without status asking institutions for permission to exist, I eventually received asylum and made my way to Germany. I have been in Germany now for 4 years. I have legal status. I have a work permit. I have a small, clean, quiet apartment. I attend a church, a real church, with a building, with a door that opens to the public, with a congregation that meets in daylight and does not have to rotate locations or whisper their prayers. The first Sunday I attended that church, as a free man, not hiding anything, not performing for anyone, not calculating risks. I stopped in the entrance of the building, just stopped. I stood there and I looked at the ordinary, wonderful, previously inconceivable fact of this room full of people sitting openly in chairs, reading from Bibles they had not had to smuggle, singing in full voice, praying with their eyes closed and their faces completely unguarded. And I thought, I am alive. I am here. This is real. This is happening. And it cost everything, and it was worth it. I cried in the entrance of that church the way I have learned in this life to cry, which is to say, without shame. I have cried a great deal in the past several years. I was raised in a culture that taught men that emotion was weakness. I no longer believe that. I believe that the capacity to feel things fully, to let things land, to be moved. I believe this is one of the ways we know we are alive, and I have felt very much alive since I found what I found. Even the grief feels alive. Even the loss feels alive. Everything feels more present, more real, more vivid than the years before it did. I don't know exactly how to explain that, but it is true. The hardest thing about arriving in a new country and a new life, harder than not speaking the language, harder than not understanding the systems, harder than being alone in an entirely unfamiliar place, was the guilt. The guilt came in 2 forms, and I want to tell you about both of them because I think they are important, and I don't think people talk about them enough in testimonies like this. The first was the guilt about the people who had been arrested in that raid. I turned it over in my mind constantly. Could my presence in that group have contributed to the raid? Could something about my history, my background, my identity have drawn attention? Did the investigation that eventually found them begin somewhere near me? I will never know the answers to these questions with certainty, and the not knowing is its own kind of torment. I have prayed for each of those people by name, the ones whose names I knew, every day since I left Iran. I have asked God to be with them in whatever situation they are in. I have asked for forgiveness for any harm I may have caused, even unintentionally. I have tried to hold my responsibility honestly without being consumed by it. I am still working on that. The second form of guilt was about my family, my parents, my father especially. I have already told you who my father was. The loyal servant of the revolution, the proud member of the guard, the man who wept when a cleric told him his son had the heart of a soldier for Allah. What had I done to him? Not just by leaving, by becoming this. A Christian, an apostate by the definitions of everything he had given his life to. If he knew, and perhaps by now he does know or suspects, what would it do to him? The man who spent his life in service of a religious state, whose son is now telling this story to cameras in Germany. I managed to make contact with my younger sister about 6 months after I arrived in Germany. The call was brief and careful. We both knew that any communication could be monitored and had to be treated accordingly. She told me our parents were alive and in reasonable health. She told me they had been given an official version of my departure, something about political complications, about having made enemies. The true reason, my faith, my conversion, was not mentioned. At the very end of the call, when we had both said everything we could safely say, my sister paused and said very quietly, "I pray for you, Darius, every day." I have thought about those words every single day since. I don't know what she meant by them, what God she was praying to, what she knew or suspected about what had happened to me, whether those words contained more information than they appeared to on the surface. But she prays for me, every day, and I pray for her. And somehow that thread of prayer, stretching from a phone call to Tehran to a small apartment in Germany, feels like one of the most real and living things in my life. My father, I think about him in a particular way. He is the most complicated grief I carry. He is the person I was most afraid of disappointing, and the person whose love I most wanted to deserve, and the person from whom I am most distant now, in every sense of that word. I believe, because the faith I now hold teaches me this, and because I choose to believe it even when it is hard to believe, that the same God who pursued me across years of loyal service to a different creed is also present in Tehran, is also near my father, knows his name and his history and the weight of what he carries. I pray for my father every night. I forgive my father for the things from my childhood that need forgiving. I ask God to make my father's heart soft enough to receive something real. That is all I can do from here, but I do it. People ask me this question regularly. People at my church, people at the asylum support organization that helped me when I first arrived, people who have heard fragments of my story and want to understand the full shape of it. The question always comes in some form of, was it worth it? Meaning, if you could go back to that night in 2011, to that apartment in Tehran, to that moment standing in the doorway looking at an old man who blessed you, knowing now everything it would cost you, would you still open the door? And I want to answer carefully, because I do not want to be dishonest about the cost. I do not want to make this sound like a transaction where you give up some things and receive some better things in exchange, and it all nets out positive in the end, and was pretty painless, really. It was not painless. The cost was real. The loss was real. The grief is real. Present tense, ongoing. I still have mornings when I wake up and there's a moment before I'm fully conscious, where I'm just a person in a room, and then the full weight of my situation arrives. The country I cannot return to, the family I cannot see, the life I cannot have, and that weight is not small. I want to be honest about that. But yes, without any hesitation or caveat or qualification, yes, it was worth it. It is worth it. Every single day it is worth it. Because what I found, when I found Jesus, when I read the Gospels, when I sat with that old man's face in my memory and asked God to show me if it was real, when I prayed my first honest prayer and felt something answer, what I found was the answer to the question I had been carrying since I was a boy. The question was, does God love me? Not just require things from me, not just judge me, not just watch me perform and assess whether my performance is adequate, but love me, know me, be glad I exist, run toward me. The answer I found was so much larger and more complete and more overwhelming than I had imagined it could be, that there is simply no scenario in which I would choose not to have found it, because you cannot unfind something this real. Once you have encountered this kind of love, this specific, personal, costly, pursuing love that I found in the gospel, you cannot make yourself unknow it. And even if you could, why would you? Why would you choose to go back to the hollow performance? Why would you choose the prison of trying to earn something that has already been given? I have a community now, a real community, scattered across Europe and the world. Some of them Iranian like me, some of them German, some of them from other countries and other stories. They know who I am. They know the things I am ashamed of. They know the years I spent doing things I now grieve. They know the guilt I carry about the people in that apartment. They know about my father and my sister and the kitchen window and the moment I drove away. They know all of it, and they are still there. Every Sunday and beyond Sunday. Still there. Still calling my name. Still the family I lost and found in the same impossible season. That is not nothing. That is not a small thing in exchange for what I gave up. That is a miracle. Every gathering of that community is a miracle. Friends, I need to pause again for just a moment, because this is the heart of everything I'm sharing with you today. If you are watching this and you feel that longing I described, that reaching for something real, something that doesn't depend on your performance, something that knows your name, I want to encourage you. Don't dismiss that. Don't push it back down. Whatever name you have for whatever tradition, whatever the cost, that longing is, and it is pointing. And if you have a question or afraid to, I want to tell you directly. You can ask it, leave it in this community, you are safer. And now let me few more. I want to say something that I have thought about carefully, and that I believe is important enough to say slowly and clearly. Because I know that stories like mine are sometimes received in ways that I find uncomfortable, and that I think miss the point. When people hear that a Muslim has left Islam and become a Christian, there is a tendency in some circles, not everywhere, but in some places, to receive that story as a kind of score, as evidence that one side is winning something, as ammunition in a cultural or civilizational conflict. I reject that framing completely, and I want to be explicit about why. The people who raised me were not villains. My father was not a monster. The imams who taught me were not evil men trying to deceive me. They were human beings who believed sincerely in what they had been given, who tried to live according to what they understood to be true and right, who loved God in the way they understood God. My father's faith was real. His devotion was genuine. His tears when the cleric praised his son were not fake. He loved something he believed in. I cannot hate him for that. I will not hate him for that. And there are hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, raising children and working jobs and trying to be good people, who are not defined by the most extreme expressions of political Islam, who have the same questions I had, who hunger for the same things I hungered for, who deserve to have their questions treated with respect, rather than with either dismissal or weaponization. My becoming a Christian is not a statement against them. It is a statement about what I found. Those are different things. I say this very deliberately because I have seen what happens when testimonies like mine become political property. They get stripped of their humanity, reduced to talking points, used to stoke fear or anger or contempt. I will not participate in that. My story is not a weapon. My story is about a man who was desperately searching for love and found it in an unexpected place. That is all. That is the whole thing. The people I have the most compassion for, the people I think about most, the people I carry in my prayers most specifically, are the people who are exactly where I was before everything changed. Muslims who are sincere and searching, who feel something hollow that they cannot name, who have maybe seen something or read something or had a conversation that cracked open a door they were taught to keep sealed, who are afraid of what following that curiosity might cost them. Those people deserve gentleness, not pressure, not arguments, not someone trying to score a conversion, someone who will sit across from them and say, I know, I was there, here is what I found. Take your time, ask everything you need to ask. My life in Germany is still being built, still in progress, still a long way from what I might have imagined for myself if someone had asked me at 20 years old where I would be at 44. I work at a distribution warehouse, not the career of my imagination, not anything that maps onto my previous life, but it is honest work, and I do it alongside people from a dozen different countries, and I am grateful for every ordinary morning of it. I am slowly learning German. Slowly. My German is still embarrassing, and my German colleagues are very patient about this. My church has been central to my survival here. The pastor is a man with the kind of patience that can only come from genuine faith. He has sat with me through some very dark weeks, some very difficult conversations, some moments when the weight of everything I carried felt like it might actually be more than I could hold. He has never told me to feel less than I feel, or to pray harder, and it will go away. He has sat with me in the difficulty and let it be difficult and trusted that God was present in the middle of it. That has meant more to me than I know how to say. I have begun, carefully, to share my story in small settings, with other refugees and asylum seekers who are going through their own versions of loss and displacement, in church gatherings where people want to hear from someone who has lived what some of them are living, in conversations that happen the way real conversations happen, without cameras and preparation. This recording is the most public thing I have done with my testimony. I will be honest with you. There was fear involved in deciding to do this. There are people in Iran who would prefer that I stay silent. There are institutions that would not be glad to see this video. My face on a screen carries a specific kind of risk that most people making YouTube videos do not have to think about. But I kept coming back to this. If one person watches this video and feels less alone, it is worth the risk. If one person who is secretly searching gets the courage to seek further, it is worth it. If one person who is in the kind of darkness I was in, completely alone with a question they are terrified to ask, finds through this video some thread of light to follow, then everything it cost me to sit here and speak is worth it 10,000 times over. I refuse to let fear make the decision. I have made that choice too many times already. So I am here. Darius Karimi, 44 years old. Born in Tehran, Iran. Former member of the Revolutionary Guard. A man who spent years in service of an ideology he has now left behind. A man who has lost a country and found a home. A man who has lost a religion and found a relationship. A man who drove away from a kitchen window in Tehran and has been driving towards something ever since. Something that keeps meeting him more than halfway. Something that was already running before he started moving. Just grace. That's all it is. Freely given. Like rain. Let me tell you about the first Christmas I spent as a Christian. It was my second year in Germany. I was invited to celebrate with a family from my church, the Hoffmans, a German family with 4 children, and a house that smells like cinnamon and pine, and a kind of warmth in every room that makes you feel welcomed before anyone has said a word. There were children everywhere, running and calling to each other, and someone was playing piano in the next room, not very well but enthusiastically, and the smell of something baking came from the kitchen. And there was a tree, a Christmas tree, decorated and lit, standing in the living room. In Iran, Christmas does not exist in the public sphere. It was not part of my childhood, not part of my world, not something I had ever encountered, except as an abstract Western phenomenon. I stood in front of that tree for longer than was probably normal. I stood there and I looked at the lights, and I thought about what I now knew. Not just that Christmas was a holiday, but what it was actually about. The moment that God entered the world as a child, as a vulnerable, cold, ordinary-looking baby in a country under occupation, to a poor couple who couldn't afford a room. The Almighty, becoming small, the one who made the stars, needing to be fed. That image, God becoming small, God entering human life in the most helpless possible form, not as a conqueror but as a child, broke something open in me again. Standing in the Hoffmans' living room, looking at Christmas lights. The same opening that happened in the raided apartment. The same opening that happened reading The Prodigal Son. This God who descends. This God who does not stay at a safe and majestic distance, but who comes down into the cold and the ordinary and the mess of human life and says, I'm here. I'm with you. I know what it's like now. One of the Hoffman children, a girl named Lena, 8 years old, missing a front tooth, noticed me standing there and came over and stood next to me and looked at the tree too. And then she looked up at me and said, in German, would I like to sing with her? And I said yes, even though I didn't know the words. So she very seriously got a little booklet with the words printed in it, and she stood next to me and pointed to each word, while she sang very slowly so I could try to follow. We sang Silent Night together in Lena's living room. This 8-year-old German girl, and this 40-year-old former Iranian Revolutionary Guard officer. And I could not sing very well, and my pronunciation was wrong, and she corrected me very gently twice. If someone had told me at 25 what my life would look like at 44, I would not have believed them. I could not have imagined this. And yet, this is my life. This is real. These are the kinds of small and completely ordinary miracles that fill a life that has been found by grace. Not dramatic all the time, not always moving. Sometimes just a little girl with a songbook teaching a large man to sing a song he doesn't know the words to yet, and both of them meaning it completely. I want to speak directly to any Muslim who is watching this. I know you might be watching with skepticism or with anger that someone from your community or tradition would tell a story like this publicly. I know you might feel that I am betraying something. I understand that feeling. I know its texture from the inside. What I want to say to you is not an argument. I am not here to debate you. I am not here to tell you that everything you have ever believed is wrong or worthless. I know too much about what it is to believe sincerely, to dismiss the sincerity of others. What I want to say to you is something simpler and more personal than any argument. The questions you might be carrying, the ones you don't say out loud, the ones that arise in the quiet moments when no one is watching, those questions are not sin. They are not weakness. They are honesty. And honest questions deserve honest searching. Not shouting, not pressure, not shame. Searching. The Jesus you may have been taught about in an Islamic context is a partial picture. Isa, the prophet, the miracle worker, the one who will return, all of that is part of the Islamic picture of Jesus. But the Jesus of the Gospels is more than that. The Jesus who says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That Jesus, the one who offers rest rather than more requirements, that Jesus is worth encountering on his own terms, not through someone else's interpretation, on his own terms, in his own words. Just read the Gospel of John. That's all I'm asking. Read it as if you don't already know what you think about it. Ask God to show you what is true. That prayer, I believe with everything I am, that prayer will not go unanswered. And if you find yourself in a situation where asking these questions puts you in physical danger, if your family or your government or your community would respond to your curiosity with punishment, please know there are people who can help you. There are organizations built specifically to support people in your situation. There are communities of people who have walked exactly this path. You are not the first. You will not be the last. And you do not have to walk it alone. Look for help. It exists. Use this comment section if it feels safer than searching on your own. We are here. I want to say something about faith that I think is important and that I think gets lost sometimes in conversion stories. When someone tells a conversion story, there's often an implicit ending to it. The person found Jesus, or found God, or found whatever they found, and now they are whole and healed, and everything is fine. The story ends with arrival. My story does not end with arrival. My story is still happening. My faith is still growing and being challenged, and sometimes feeling very strong, and sometimes feeling, honestly, thinner than I would like. There are days when I pray and feel very close to God, and days when I pray and feel like I am speaking into empty air. There are weeks when I am full of gratitude and peace, and weeks when the grief about my family or my former colleagues in prison is so heavy that peace feels like something other people have access to. I am not a finished product. I am a person in process, being transformed slowly by something I did not create and cannot control. And I think that honesty is important, because I don't want anyone to become a follower of Jesus expecting that it will make everything easy, or eliminate suffering, or resolve all your questions. It has not done any of those things for me. What it has done is give me, in the middle of the difficulty, not instead of the difficulty, something to hold on to, a presence that doesn't leave, a love that doesn't depend on my performance, a story large enough to contain my story, including the worst parts of it. That is not nothing. That is actually everything. The person I am becoming is different from the person I was, not in dramatic, visible ways all the time. I'm still the same man with the same face and the same voice and many of the same tendencies, but something essential is different. There is less performance, less hiding, less of the exhausting work of maintaining a version of yourself for the approval of others, and more presence, more capacity to actually be here, in this moment, with this person, in this conversation, more ability to receive kindness without immediately wondering what it costs, more willingness to sit with difficulty without needing to resolve it immediately. I think this is what the theologians call sanctification, being made holy, being slowly transformed into something more like what you were meant to be. It is slow. It is not always comfortable. It sometimes involves encountering things about yourself that you would prefer not to encounter. But it is real, and it is going somewhere. And I trust, even on the days when I trust very quietly, from a great distance, through clenched teeth, I trust the one who is doing it. I want to end practically, because I know that a story like this can be emotional and moving, and then the person watching isn't quite sure what to do with it afterward. So let me be concrete. If you are a person of Muslim background who is curious about Jesus, whether for the first time, or whether you've been curious for a while and haven't known what to do with the curiosity, the best thing I can recommend is simple. Read the Gospel of John, just that one book. It is not long. It is written in a way that is intended for people encountering Jesus for the first time. Read it without a teacher telling you what to think. Ask God, whatever you believe about God right now, to show you what is true, and then pay attention to what happens. If you are already a follower of Jesus, and you have Muslim friends or family members, I want to say this to you clearly. Be patient. Be gentle. Do not argue them into faith. No one has ever been argued into faith. Love them. Answer their questions honestly when they ask. Let your life demonstrate something they have not seen in the name of Jesus before. What changed me was not an argument. It was a face. The face of an old man who blessed the person pointing a weapon at him. The face of Miriam on a park bench who told me God had been pursuing me. The faces of people in a hidden apartment, singing quietly behind closed doors. Faces matter more than arguments. Your face matters more than your arguments. If you are in a place of danger, if your faith or your curiosity or your questions put you at risk, please do not try to navigate that alone. There are organizations and networks specifically designed to help people in your situation. There are communities of people who have been exactly where you are. You may have to search carefully. You may have to move slowly. But you are not alone, and help exists. Please reach out for it. Reach out here if you need to. This community will receive you. And if you are watching this without any particular personal stake in it, maybe you are just someone who stumbled onto this channel and you are curious, or you are someone whose friend shared this video, or you are just generally interested in these kinds of stories, I want to say thank you for watching. These stories matter, not as entertainment, as testimony, as evidence that the thing we are talking about is real and changes lives and is worth considering seriously. Before I finish, one last thing. If this story touched something in you today, if it gave you something you needed, or made you think, or moved you in any way, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Send it to one person. You don't need to write a long message about it. Just say, "Watch this," because my voice alone reaches only so far. But every share extends the reach of this testimony further than I can go myself. And somewhere out there is a person who needs to hear this who hasn't found it yet. Be the one who sends it to them. And please, subscribe if you haven't already, and press the notification bell so that when the next testimony comes you won't miss it. Because this is not the only story. There are many more voices like mine. Many more people who left everything to follow something real. Many more testimonies that deserve to be heard. We are building something here together, a place where these stories can be told and received and shared. Thank you for being part of it. My name is Darius. I was born in Tehran, and I live in Germany. I was a soldier for a creed I no longer hold, and I am now, imperfectly, gratefully, completely, a follower of Jesus Christ. This is my testimony, and it is not over yet.